And we were bad communicators when we got married.
Yeah.
We did not know how to communicate with each other.
We didn't realize that because you and I both in our respective places know how to talk well, or we know how to orate. We know how to teach. Both of us are teachers. I'm a teacher and I love teaching.
Yeah.
I can instruct. I can train. But learning how to communicate for the point of agreement between two people like us, married people.
Well, like you said, it's not just relaying a point, which is where public speaking comes in, but being able to interpret what someone else is saying. Yeah. So you got to be like bilingual. There's multiple languages that everyone, we talked about this last week, we're going to talk about it again this week about people's filters. But you got to understand, everyone is speaking their own language. Yeah. And when you confusion comes when you can no longer interpret what the other person is trying to say. Offense sets in and all that kind of thing. And, we were both could be easily offended by each other when we first got married because we didn't know each other's intents when we were speaking and saying certain things. We didn't know, there was a lack of trust there of understanding where you were coming from or why you were doing what you were doing.
And all those things that you just mentioned has a direct relation to how we was raised, the things that we experienced in our lives, whether good or bad. We built walls, things to protect ourselves. And when you are an insecure person, you walk around with a lot of assumptions without even, digging deep and then communicating and actually knowing what some person's actually knowing what a person's intent is towards you. We assume. So we hear that trigger word. Yep. Everybody has a trigger word or a trigger phrase that sets them off. And immediately we start imagining and thinking the worst. Yep. I know we did that a lot. Oh, yeah. And then I will say, well, that's what so-and-so said to me when I was 9 years old. And so I just automatically think that's where you're going with it. And so on and so on. So a lot of people have a lot of hurts and offenses from childhood and just bad relationships. Maybe you was married before or you had a lot of girlfriends or boyfriends that hurt you. And so you bring that into your marriage and that develops your inability to communicate. That's
one of the reasons we don't believe in what we call serial dating. Which
mm-hmm.
is dating a whole bunch of people before you get married, because inevitably you're going to bring in all those experiences into your marriage, and it's not fair to your spouse. And even though we weren't serial daters, we were like each other's first for many things. Relationships with our siblings, with our parents, everything, friends, still impacted the way we handled each other. So you have enough to deal with without being romantically involved with 20 different people before you get married. So that's why we tell people, what do you call it, date with the intent to marry? Like, be sure, don't just hop into relationships in and out because I just want to be with somebody, things like that. Because you're jeopardizing your future marriage, because it's very, very hard to come into a marriage fresh without taking into it the experience.
I've had that same experience, as a professional makeup artist. I have worked with a lot of people and I've had people sit in my chair and they'd be like, oh, I don't like to wear makeup because when I went to prom in 1979 or whenever it was terrible. I had a bad experience. I broke out or something bad happened. I didn't like it. I hated it. So I swore off makeup. So I don't think you can make me happy. So yeah, it took me a while to convince them, hey, just give me a try. And then when I do it, they were like, oh, I didn't know I could look this good. Yep. Well, that's because you left the conversation. You got offended at that first time. And you'd be surprised. You only need one bad experience and you'll write off everything. So imagine having a previous bad marriage or a bad relationship with someone, and you write off every man or every woman and you assume that everybody's out to get you.
People do that, and then things that write off will be based on race, based on income, based on where virus come from. People do it based on, God forbid, horoscopes, whatever. Like the wildest things. You go on Instagram for half a minute and people got these laws they create about who they will and won't date, look at, based on what their profession is, based on what their parents look like, based on what, just all kinds of different things.
Yeah, and some people won't do it because somebody else had a bad experience. They never even experienced it, but they won't do it because so-and-so that they respected said, this happened bad for me, so it's going to happen bad for you. And they built laws. So that's one reason why social media, it can be good, but it also can be bad too, because we are experiencing everybody else's experiences through a filter. Yeah. And not having the full picture. So we write laws in our heart and say, well, so-and-so did it and they said it wasn't good, then it must not be good at all.
And if it seems like we've gotten off track of communication, we haven't, because what we're trying to say is these things, these laws you create and these cultures you created impacts the way you deal with other people.